There is a kind of silence that feels different from the beginning. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It simply appears. At first, you assume it's temporary, a pause, a moment of rest, a lull that will pass. But then it lingers. The person is still there, still responding, still present in a technical sense, and yet something essential has gone quiet. Not withdrawn in a dramatic way, not pulled back in a way that invites confrontation, just muted. Conversations shorten, responses slow, the familiar emotional rhythm disappears. What makes it unsettling is that nothing obvious caused it. No argument, no conflict, no visible fracture. So the mind starts filling in gaps. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're distracted, maybe they're upset but don't want to say it. None of those explanations quite fit because this quiet doesn't feel reactive. It feels deliberate without being intentional, as if something inside them stopped reaching outward. They still listen, but they don't lean in the same way. They still care, but the urgency is gone. They still notice things, but they don't respond immediately. It isn't indifference. It isn't disinterest. It's restraint. And restraint makes people uneasy. We're conditioned to expect emotional availability to sound like movement, like reassurance, engagement, quick response. When that movement disappears, the silence feels loaded. People begin replaying interactions, searching for the moment something went wrong, wondering if they missed a signal. But the silence doesn't resolve into explanation. It stays neutral. And neutrality is difficult to tolerate. When someone doesn't react the way you expect, you lose your sense of position with them. You don't know where you stand. You don't know how much access you still have. So you probe gently at first, a message that once received an immediate reply, a comment meant to spark the old dynamic. The response arrives, but it's flatter, polite, contained, not cold, just not open. And this is usually when assumptions form. Quiet becomes rejection. Slowness becomes distance. Restraint becomes fading interest. But something about this doesn't feel like fading. It feels like concentration, as if attention has turned inward without apology. The person isn't distracted. They're focused, just not on you. They've stopped filling space. Before, silence made them uncomfortable. They rushed to soften it. They explained. They clarified. They adjusted their tone so nothing would be misread. Now, silence is allowed to exist. They don't rescue conversations anymore. They don't smooth emotional tension. They don't volunteer reassurance. They let moments hang. And that changes the dynamic completely because silence exposes what urgency used to cover. It reveals who depends on constant feedback, who interprets calm as threat, who feels destabilized without emotional mirroring. The quiet person notices this. They don't react to it. They observe it. And that observation is new. Before, they were inside the emotional exchange. Now they're slightly outside it, not disengaged, just no longer merged. This shift is often labeled incorrectly. People say they've become distant, guarded, closed off. But those words don't quite fit. Distance implies intent. Guarded implies fear. Closed off implies refusal. None of those feel accurate here. What's happening feels more like subtraction. Something unnecessary has been removed. They aren't pulling away from others. They're pulling back from a version of themselves. The version that over-responded. The version that absorbed everything. The version that felt responsible for emotional flow. That version is quiet now. And without it, the person appears different, harder to read, less predictable, more still. They don't match energy automatically. They don't escalate emotional intensity. They don't rush to repair misunderstanding. They wait. Waiting changes power dynamics. because the one who can tolerate silence the longest is rarely the one seeking reassurance. This is where discomfort sets in. The quiet doesn't feel like absence. It feels like presence without permission, as if the person is still there, but no longer available in the same way. You may notice they answer questions directly now, without elaboration, without emotional cushioning, not rude, just precise. That precision feels unfamiliar. Before, there was softness in everything they said. Now there is clarity. They don't justify pauses. They don't apologize for not reacting. They don't explain their internal state. They simply are. This confuses people who were used to interpreting their emotional cues. Fewer cues mean fewer points of control. This is usually the moment when others try harder. They share more. They intensify. They attempt to reestablish the old rhythm, but the rhythm doesn't return. The quiet holds, and the person remains calm inside it. That calm is the most misleading part. Calm is often mistaken for detachment, but this calm doesn't feel empty. It feels contained, like something has settled, like something inside has decided not to move unless necessary. If this were avoidance, there would be anxiety underneath. If this were anger, there would be sharpness. If this were disinterest, there would be disengagement. None of those are present. What's present is restraint, a choice not to respond reflexively, a choice not to engage emotionally without reason. The reason hasn't been named yet, and that's what keeps others uncertain. This quiet isn't defensive, it's selective. Selectivity doesn't announce itself. It simply changes how someone occupies space. There is something else happening beneath this silence, something structural, something that didn't come from a single moment. And once it begins, it doesn't reverse easily. The quiet itself isn't the real shift. The real shift is what the quiet allows them to see. What the quiet allows them to see is uncomfortable at first. Without the constant pull to respond, small details rise into focus. Patterns that once blurred together separate themselves. Who speaks to be heard and who speaks to connect. Who grows uneasy when they aren't mirrored back immediately. Who mistakes emotional access for closeness. Before, everything felt equally important. Every signal demanded attention. Now, signals carry different weight. Some feel light, some feel heavy, some no longer feel like theirs to carry at all. This is where the misunderstanding deepens. From the outside, silence looks like disengagement. Quiet looks like distance from others. But what's actually happening is distance from compulsion. They're no longer pulled into every emotional current that passes by. They don't automatically step into the role of stabilizer. They don't absorb tone, mood, or expectation as if it were their responsibility. That reflex has weakened not through effort, but through repetition. At some point, the system learned that constant responsiveness came at a cost, not a dramatic cost, a slow one. Energy drained quietly, clarity blurred, the sense of self softened too much around others. So something adjusted, and that adjustment didn't ask for permission. This is where the midpoint shift takes shape. What looks like withdrawal isn't withdrawal at all. It's containment. What feels like coldness isn't coldness. It's precision. What appears to be distance isn't separation. It's spacing. They haven't stopped feeling. They've stopped flooding. Emotions still arrive, but they pause. Instead of spilling outward immediately, they're felt internally first. Sometimes they aren't expressed at all, not because they're suppressed, but because they don't need release to be processed. This is unsettling for people who relied on constant emotional feedback, who measured closeness by reaction speed, who felt secure only when reassurance was immediate. The quiet person no longer plays that game. They don't escalate when others escalate. They don't reassure when reassurance is demanded. They don't explain silence to make others comfortable. They let discomfort exist. And that's when something becomes unavoidable. The quiet isn't about pushing others away. It's about no longer pulling others in at the expense of themselves. This is the psychological truth that tends to appear late, often without language. Empaths frequently learn early that attunement keeps things stable, that reading others prevents conflict, that responsiveness maintains connection. Over time, that turns into overfunctioning. They feel before others do. They respond before being asked. They soften situations before they harden. Eventually, the system reaches a limit, not loudly, not dramatically, silently. The quiet marks the moment when overfunctioning stops working. And when it stops working, it doesn't collapse. It reorganizes. The empath doesn't become less caring. They become less available for emotional extraction. They don't disappear. They become selective. Connection doesn't end, but it changes shape. It now has conditions: pacing, reciprocity, respect for silence. Those conditions were always needed. They were just never enforced. Now they are. And that enforcement isn't spoken, it's embodied. People feel it immediately. They sense that access has changed, that old emotional shortcuts no longer work, that urgency doesn't produce closeness anymore. Some adapt, some feel rejected, some leave. The quiet person doesn't manage these outcomes. They observe them, because observation has replaced reaction. This is what healing looks like when it isn't explained, when it isn't framed as growth, when it isn't packaged as progress. It looks like stillness, stillness that doesn't seek validation, stillness that doesn't need to be understood, stillness that doesn't rush to connect. And stillness can feel threatening to those who depended on immediacy. Immediacy is easy to control. Stillness isn't. Here is the unresolved truth that lingers at the end of this shift. When an empath suddenly goes quiet, it isn't a warning sign for others. It's a signal to themselves, a signal that something inside has decided to remain intact. They aren't closing their heart. They're closing the leak. They aren't disappearing. They're consolidating. Once that happens, the world doesn't get the same version of them back. It gets a quieter one, a slower one, a more deliberate one. Someone who no longer proves care through urgency. Someone who no longer explains silence. Someone who allows misunderstanding to exist without correcting it. That quiet isn't temporary. It's the sound of something settling into place. And if you've noticed it, whether in yourself or in someone else, it's already too late to return to how it was. Because once silence stops feeling dangerous, noise never sounds the same again.